Support for California and AI was provided by the Tribal Alliance of Sovereign Indian Nations, the Western States Petroleum Association, KP Public Affairs, Perry Communications Group, Culkin Public Affairs, Capital Advocacy, the Weideman Group, Stutzman Public Affairs, Lucas Public Affairs, and the California Professional Firefighters.
So all our folks here are in, their bios are in your handout here, so I don't want to go into too much, except Shane Gusman, who's joined us here today instead of Matt Broad. So thanks so much for kind of stepping in at the last minute. I really want to get right into it. So because we're going to do a little look back and look forward, because if there's anything you know about politics is the past always informs the future. And so let's start with something really basic here, which is the essential flood of AI-related bills we've seen in the last few years. And last year, lawmakers sent Governor Newsom 38 bills, AI-related bills, and he signed 18 of them into law. We're going to talk about one he vetoed here too, but anyway, a range of issues, everything from performers' rights, deep fakes, child porn, data privacy, healthcare issues, etc. I wanted to ask the panel, and I'm just going to start here on my left and work our way down. Was there any particular single bill or groups of bills that really caught your eye the most and stood out for you the most? And we'll start to my left here with Shane Gusman.
Is this on?
It should be on, yes.
Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. Sorry about that. I've been in committee all day. So that's a really great question. For our firm represents a bunch of unions that care about this stuff a lot, and a few of them actually sponsored legislation on this topic. SAG-AFTRA, the Union of Actors and Voice Artists and Recording Artists and others, they actually sponsored two bills. One was AB 1836 by Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, and the other was AB 2602 by Assemblymember Kalra, and it was all about sort of protecting their work. That's a big issue for workers in general, but particularly artists. How do they protect their work as this technology, improves and improves and gets easier to use? And so it was kind of, they 1836 dealt with this issue about right of publicity and how do you protect your image from being used without your consent. And so what that bill did was it added digital replicas to that law, and was signed by the governor and will protect folks going forward. The other bill, 2602, deals with living artists and how they contractually authorize the use of their digital selves in productions. And you'll all recall the strike, the Hollywood strike from last year. It went on and on and on. A big part of that was AI and how that would affect the artists going forward. They've got some good language in their contract, and AB 2602 kind of brings that into state law. Those were the two we focused on.
Thank you. Jason, you were in the governor's office at that time. What stands out for you?
I had actually just left a couple months before, so I was in the office when those bills were moving through the process, but not during bill signing. I'll leave 1047 aside because I imagine we will return to that. So one of the bills that the governor did sign, I don't remember the bill number because I'm not as good with remembering that stuff, but it was a Berman bill that clarified that synthetically generated child sexual abuse material was illegal the same way that regularly generated CSAM was. I think it's a good bill because I think it's a good bill, because I think it's good policy. I'm mentioning it in this context because I think it could be a roadmap for how I would think the state and states may want to think about regulating artificial intelligence, which is AI creates, there's a whole positive side to AI, so we should talk about that during this panel, but AI creates a lot of harms that are otherwise already illegal or otherwise already understood to be harmful. There are new categories of harms that are created. in addition, and I imagine we'll talk about those as well. But I think one of the things we have to do as a gating condition is look at the things that AI does now that are illegal, scamming seniors, exploiting children, and we need to make it clear through statute that those things remain illegal. If it was illegal before AI, it's illegal with AI. Trademark Google. So thanks, John. I stole your client's line anyway. And so I think it provides a roadmap for how we should think about addressing harms much more broadly from this technology.
Great, Sacha.
Yeah, hi. Tech Oversight Project wasn't yet Tech Oversight California last year. We launched this year in March. Previously, it had been much more active federally.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just glad I wasn't the first.
Nothing going on here, so good time.
No, I know, and I'm just glad I wasn't the first person to point out that John lobbies for Google, because one of the reasons why we chose to expand into California is because when you look at bills like 1047 that had a lot of energy around them and yet unfortunately were vetoed, and you compare that to the amount of spending that Google had on lobbying last year, that was $12 million. And you think, okay, well, California, big budgets, not that much. But when you think about that, is actually more than they spent in the last 20 years combined. So you look at that figure and you think, what was happening last year? California, maybe they were spending to kill bills they don't like. So that's one of the ones we would have supported. I think good news for us is the public opinion is on our side. I think 75% of Californians want the state to protect the public from potential harms of AI. So looking forward to discussing 1047's successor on this panel.
That is coming, yes.
With that, welcome. So I'll start with the disclaimer and say I'm John Ross, and the views expressed here are John Ross's and not those of my sponsors. So just to be clear. On that point, just factually on the Google spend last year, I've seen a lot said about that. About 3/4 more of that was on a media campaign that was directed at Buffy Wicks's press bill, where they were running ads because the press wasn't covering their side of the story. That was, on one thing. They haven't done anything like that before. They were forced to do it there. So that was the account of it. So I think the impression that was all spent on lobbying on AI is a little bit off. But anyway, back to the bills. So I was going to raise the same two bills that Shane raised. I had a note on that in part just because we were on the opposite side of that one, but it was an example of where everybody came together and agreed. I think it was easy to find agreement there because we were sort of dealing with the outputs of systems. We were looking at actual harms and real fact cases, and we could write rules around that. I think where this gets really hard is when we're trying to paint on a board that's very big where we're not really sure what the problems are yet. But in that case, I think it was one where we all came together.
Well, we've been talking all around SB 1047. We obviously heard Senator Scott Wiener talk about SB 1047. If you are not familiar for some reason, I'll just very, very brief. That bill would have made California the first state to impose strict regulations and liability on developers of large-scale AI models, regardless of the potential for harm. That's it in a nutshell. Obviously, there's much bigger language than that. But the governor said, quote, he vetoed it because, quote, it does not take into account whether an AI system is deployed in high-risk environments, involves critical decision-making, or the use of sensitive data. Scott Wiener's response was that was a missed opportunity. So, Jason, I'll start with you. I think you have an opinion on this. Was he correct? Was it a missed opportunity?
No, I don't think the senator was correct in his perspective. I think the governor was right to veto that bill. I think we can all agree that there are problems that need to be addressed, and then you don't have to jump directly 5 steps ahead to that precise bill needed to be the answer to all of the problems that we potentially see from AI. I think there's a whole bunch of logic that goes in between the beginning and the end of that story. And the deal with a bill is it can get negotiated through the legislative process, but by the time it gets to the governor, he's got basically 2 choices. And in his estimation, his veto letter speaks for itself. I think it was well argued. But one of the things that I think is important that even Senator Wiener, who's a good friend of mine and I work with closely on a lot of things, is that we're not the 1047 veto is not the end of that story. And frankly, between SB 53 and what SB 53 will likely become in the near future, I don't know how much Scott shared during his keynote. I wasn't here for it. But what SB 53 may become shortly, and in addition, what the governor did in fact ask to have happen was to take this out of the political and lawmaking process for just a heartbeat and move it over to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, UC Berkeley, and the Stanford Human-Centered AI Institute, of which I am a fellow there, so just for full disclosure on that. And ask for some academic research into the question of, well, if 1047 wasn't the right answer, what would be the right answer? And that report has now been issued. I understand that it's been the topic of a number of discussions throughout the day today, so I'm happy to answer questions about it, but I won't restate it. Now I think the question is, okay, if the governor didn't like 1047, which is his prerogative, the legislature could come back with another bill or set of bills, which is their prerogative, and try to align more closely with the statute with where the governor may be. And I think that's, it's July, whatever it is, 9th or something now. We have between now and the middle of September to try to get that right, and to try to line up the legislative priorities and values as closely as possible with the governor's. And if there's alignment, which I hope and expect that there will be, then there will be bills signed.
Sacha, you've pretty much already made it clear you supported 1047, correct? So what's your take on whether or not that was a missed opportunity, or maybe where it's led to us today?
I think politically it probably was a missed opportunity because, as the senator said during his keynote, as where California goes, many states follow. And as we saw recently with the the attempt by Congress, this has been mentioned many times today, but I will talk about it again because it was so egregious, their attempt to overreach and preempt over 200 state bills around the country. People want their lawmakers to act, and this bill could have served a blueprint for a national non-patchwork regulations around AI. I'm happy to support SB 53 as well. I think watch the space. New text is coming, and to hear that they will incorporate some of the transparency elements from the governor's report is very encouraging. I also think the Cal Compute element is very encouraging as well. As many people know, there are various sizes of models. However, I say frequently that there isn't really any small big tech AI. You cannot have access to compute, to data centers, to the resources, to the funding available without pairing with big tech monopolistic companies. And I think it's very crucial to democratize, as the senator said, access to compute. So I do like that provision in the bill.
John?
I'll fall on the camp of it was an opportunity taken. I think the creation of the task force advanced in a really positive way the debate that's occurring in the Capitol and around these issues. I think it's made the process smarter and more informed. I could find fault with the work product that was on his desk last year and was glad that he vetoed it, but I think it was very smart to sort of take the issue out of a purely political lens and to ground it, I think, academically, and I think the work product that's likely to come out of the legislature this year will reflect that.
Well, and along those lines then, as I noted, there were 38 bills last year, there's at least 30 this year, and there's maybe more from the time I wrote this question down. What are the ones, and Sacha, I'll direct this to you to start, what are the bills maybe that you're following the most closely this year? We've mentioned SB 53 also from Senator Wiener, but there's, there's many others here that are in process right now.
Yeah, and I'm also terrible with numbers, so I could pull up my cheat sheet, or I'll just say.
Use mine.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, just take the opposite position on yours. Cute. Nice try. There are a couple bills on chatbots. Senator Padilla's bill on that would change the way that chatbots have to engage with people, represent themselves. I think SB 53 is another one. I've gone into that, but I know this isn't quite answering your question. But championing good bills is almost as important as preventing bad ones. So I do want to talk about another bill. It's just a 2-year bill, but it's SB 690 that we are very actively working to make better. It was just, I think it's in appropriations right now. It's a 2-year bill, as I said, so we have some time. But why is she talking about this? How does it relate to AI? Okay, here we go. So this bill essentially was in reaction to a California anti-wiretapping law. The law was passed to prevent eavesdropping on our phone calls. How does that relate to AI? Well, if you think about it, Meta just announced recently that they would not rule out using photos from our camera rolls on our phones to train their AI models. That's not a photo that they would upload to Facebook or Instagram, where ostensibly, you've checked the box of terms of service, and you're like, yeah, do whatever with my photo you want. No, this is the photo from your camera roll. So a photo that you took of your grandmother or your kids like 10 years ago is going to be used to train Meta's AI models. There are ongoing lawsuits against Amazon right now. A Washington judge just allowed a class action against Amazon to go forward, alleging that Alexa, their device, was spying on them in their homes after they told them to stop listening. There's like a viral TikTok video of the Instagram chatbot still listening to the person when he said, "Are you stopping listening?" She's like, "I have stopped listening," and it's still listening. And of course, Google. I believe there's an ongoing lawsuit against Google because even when users were in incognito mode, they were still being tracked. So all that to say is this bill would create an exemption for tech companies to essentially be persecuted or to be penalized and brought to court for spying on us. If you think about it, I'm sorry to wax on, but this is so important. If you think about the equivalent of picking up the phone and having a conversation over the phone line, let alone the fact that we wouldn't allow Verizon to record our phone conversations, which is essentially what we're doing every time we post something on Instagram. But then if we hang up the phone, allowing Verizon to continue to monitor our conversations in our own home. That's essentially what big tech companies are asking to do with SB 690. So I'm looking forward to amending that. I hope it stays where it is and never moves forward, but if it does, we'll be watching it.
John, it seems to me like whoever sits at that end of the table today is going to just get the heck beat out of them. So we didn't plan it that way. We really did not. Sometimes
John Ross, KP Public Affairs, not Google.
Exactly. So, but I'll ask you the same question. What are you, John Ross, not speaking for Google, watching this legislative session?
I can say on the business community generally, I think the ones that are getting the most attention are 53 and what becomes of that. I think there's a lot of engagement on that. There's AB 412, which Shane will probably mention too, that is a Rebecca Bauer-Kahn bill that attempts to regulate or protect information going into a model and respect in some form copyrighted material and how that gets used in model training. It's an issue that's in front of all the courts right now also. So a pretty hot issue. Everybody's watching that carefully. I think there's a sleeper, also Rebecca Bauer-Kahan's bill, 1405, that's trying to set standards for third-party auditors in the AI space. I represent the accounting profession too. They're trying to get their heads around it, but there's not really standards that exist in this world that tell you what to do when you're looking at an AI system like there are for banks or other things where you tend to look. So I think there's a lot of hard work to be done there. There's a whole slew of algorithmic, can't even say it, pricing bills that are following roughly along the lines of a bill that passed in New York that are getting a lot of attention, some okay, some not okay. And data centers, that's probably one that's catching Shane's folks' eyes, but a lot of questions around balancing the energy demands of data centers, the desire to have the jobs here, the ability to build and put people to work doing that, and whether that activity happens here or in other states. So just a wave of them that we're seeing.
Yeah, it's hard to narrow it down when there's that many.
I left 10 first.
I'm going to circle back to something that's been mentioned a few times today, which is Senate Bill 1047. But out of that veto, and Senator Wiener mentioned this in his keynote, came the Joint California Policy Working Group on AI Frontier Models. That's more than just a really, really long title. It's a report that suggests several keys to finding the kind of balance on AI regulation that I think we're all hoping for, including transparency requirements, third-party risk assessments, whistleblower protections, et cetera. He mentions several of those things in his presentation. I guess, and here I'll start with you this time, John. Are you optimistic that anything real is going to come out of this report and its suggestions, or honestly, is it going to be just another government report that gets a nice press release and then goes into a drawer and we never hear from again?
Yeah, I'm optimistic and expecting that good things come out of that. I think what you're going to see with AB 53 and other efforts at the end of the session is everybody attempting to anchor their work product and the work of the task force, because that's the best indication anybody has of what the governor's office may look favorably upon. And so I think the service that the report did, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when you look at 1047, there's political judgments and value judgments in every bill, but in that bill, there was a focus on the largest models and not a lot of focus on the smaller models, probably looking at costs and impacts and trying to balance economic needs. But that, if you look at the governor's veto, he was sort of saying, I think you should be looking at risk and capability, not just size. And the report at least contributes to that discussion by sort of giving you benchmarks on what a risky model looks like and where the attention ought to be focused. So I think it was a really smart strategy, and I think it's going to advance the debate.
Sacha will just keep coming back down this way.
I agree. Advancing to the debate is good. Yeah, I think the report was good. I like the elements of transparency, the recommendations of those, which I said will be in SB 53. I think one thing, I swear I'm not just here to take pot shots at John, but
if the opportunity
if the opportunity exists, one thing that I thought was remarkable was actually in the introduction of the report, where big tech was compared to big oil and big tobacco for their decades-long practice of burying internal critical research and evidence of the harms of their products, whitewashing studies, failing to be transparent, and then also funding academic studies that benefit them. I thought it's a comparison I like to make, and so it was nice to see coming out of an official government report.
I worked on that report, so again, for the full disclosure purposes, that's not what the report said. The report, and I mean, it just wasn't. The report drew a number of case studies about things that could go wrong if regulation is not advanced in a proper way. There were negative case studies about big oil and tobacco, and frankly, social media in big tech. So there were case studies on the negative side. There were also case studies on the positive side, including seatbelts and building codes. So just to be clear, that report did its best to not demonize or validate or sideline, but really try to provide an evidence-based anchor for the legislature to go about its business, right? And I think so. Just in fairness, and I will also say, having worked on that report, I have heard from all the companies about things they hated about that report as well. So I think John's being a little bit generous and gracious, which I appreciate. Bop you over the head with my little microphone here, but that report got criticized and praised by everybody, which was an interesting thing to a person like me who's watching the tactics here, because now what we're seeing is bills coming forward, as was mentioned by one of you guys. Bills are coming forward, and authors and stakeholders are working really hard to draw like page number citations out of the report, and it's really interesting. Just setting aside the policy for a second, which I know we're not supposed to do because we're in a policy forum, but setting aside the policy for a second, it's a very interesting tactic to watch companies and groups like yours and big chambers of commerce and academics all, like a Rorschach test, see what they want to see in that report, and that's good. I think it's actually a healthy thing, because what the report did not do, purposely did not do, was publish a bill text. publish a draft bill. And there was a lot of pressure to have that happen. And, I think the argument I make back against why didn't we publish a bill is because it would never have been good enough for anybody. It would have missed the mark for everyone, and it's not Fei-Fei Li and Jennifer Chase's and Tino Cuellar's responsibility to write laws for the state of California. That's the legislature's job. So I think where the report did land was in providing case studies, both positive and negative, some policy principles that legislators can choose to follow or not. Last point on this, and then I'll end my podcast here. The way that the report is being used to justify certain legislative priorities, I think, is a really healthy thing. But in doing so, you can start to connect dots. Well, this entire part of the report was not referenced in Madam Legislator, Mr. Legislator, you're using the report to justify your end. So even in the negative spaces, you can see where some of these values are lining up.
Just for anyone who listens to these when we recast them as our podcasts, no, the podcast did not just end there.
No, it did not.
Please continue to listen until we say goodbye. Okay. Shane.
Simply safe. If you're
Shane, I know labor has a big stake in this. What was your thought on this report?
Absolutely. I think, I kind of came, when I saw the veto and that there was going to be this study and a report, having been around for a while, I think I was naturally cynical about kind of what would come out of it. As you stated, we've seen lots of these things happen out of legislation that gets parked, and we're going to do a study, we're going to do an interim study. I think the fact that they came out of with a report pretty quickly, and there are folks talking about it, that's a very positive thing. Our unions care very deeply about this. They're concerned for what everybody out there in the public is concerned about, but they're also concerned about jobs. And, they're very, very focused on, what is going to be the impact of this technology on their work, whether it's the artists, whether it's truck drivers, it's just like what's going to happen here. I think someone mentioned polling. I think it's critical for people's trust in government that they really work very diligently and come out with something that puts meaningful guardrails around this, because we've done polling, others have done polling. I've never seen polling like this. People are very, very concerned across every political spectrum, every age group, every demographic you could think of. This is like one of the number one issues that they are concerned with that scares the hell out of them. And so hopefully it works.
Well, something else I think that scared a lot of people was, and we've talked about it again a couple times today, this the proposed moratorium that was in the big budget bill that just got passed, that was stricken out by a 99-1 vote, by the way, which shows you, again, how popular Ted Cruz is. But I'm curious. Fights over federalism are nothing new. There's any number of issue areas where federalism, whether it should be managed by states or by the federal government, not new. But what would have been the real ramification of this kind of a moratorium, number one? And number two, I guess, what happens if a much more popular senator, and proposes this the next go round? And Shane, why don't we start here and just work our way back?
Yeah, I think it would have been an absolute disaster because I think people think about the bills we're talking about, but it would have impacted across a much broader spectrum of government regulation, getting into how government protects its residents from all kinds of things, highway safety, whatever. And I think it would have been incredibly confusing for state and local governments to be able to implement what is AI, what laws apply to this moratorium, because it also applied to existing regulation. So I think it would have been really terrible.
Jason?
It would have been a catastrophe. And luckily for us, I'm a partisan. That was just a ridiculous Republican spasm of overreach. And had they taken a more thoughtful approach to doing a moratorium, there's a world in which they could have succeeded. But the idea that they were going to preempt all enforcement of all state law was ludicrous. I think I just published a thing in the San Francisco Chronicle, which none of you read, which is good, that argued against state preemption in the way the Senate was going to do it, but also made the point, and I'll make the point again here, that in fact we need a federally unified policy on artificial intelligence and data centers for competitiveness reasons, for national security reasons, for the ability of companies to innovate and grow and outcompete the rest of the world. I strongly believe that. Yet there has been nothing meaningful put forward by anyone. Now I'll give two exceptions to that blanket statement. The first is, and I don't agree entirely with this concept, but in OpenAI's filing, NIST filing in, I don't know, call it February or March, OpenAI, Chris Lehane signed it, so we'll just call it Chris's proposal. OpenAI proposed that frontier labs should be able to submit their technology in a top secret basis to whatever the new version of the AI Safety Institute would be. And if it were to have met certain criteria, then those models could be exempt from certain state regulation. Again, I have issues with some of the particulars there, and details matter and so forth, but that's a real idea. Now, it's not a real idea because AC doesn't exist right now, but it's a concept that holds water if it's done properly. That idea didn't go anywhere. The President of the United States is meant to release a AI action plan on July 23rd. Not a coincidence, it's my birthday, I don't think. I think they timed that up. And look, I know some of the people that are working on it, the non-sort of celebrity people that are working on it, and they're thoughtful people. And I hope that the learning that has come from how catastrophically the blanket moratorium failed will inform some of the work that they're going to put forward. I am a hardcore partisan Democrat, so I am aware of what I'm saying right now. But I do hope that there is something meaningful that comes from Donald Trump's administration, as ridiculous as that sounds, because they've just tried to do the thing they really wanted to do and it didn't work. Right? So now we're into a world of a little bit more measured sobriety. And come July 24th, when that thing is a pile, I will take all this back. But until then, I do hold out a little bit of hope that there will be something meaningful that starts a debate about what the federal regulatory structure ought to be.
Yeah, I think I do agree with Jason. There should be federal regulation. It needs to be a floor, not a ceiling. And the problem with Republicans in Congress right now being in charge is that they will often only ever go for the ceiling. And for the non-policy vernacular folks, you're totally forgiven, and I'm sorry for saying things like floors and ceilings, but that means essentially bills that allow for the most innovation, bills that allow for the most protections, bills that allow for the most adaptations, instead of blanketing the nation with some very restrictive policy, for example, that would also be very partisan, most likely. Yeah, I think this, the defeat 99-1 in the Senate of the AI moratorium was a huge blow to the tech industry, whose hubris, I believe, led them to believe that they could simply ram this through on a budget bill. It was a miscalculation to choose Ted Cruz as the champion. My God, what were you thinking?
Not a federal lobby.
But you know, I mean, I do think if they chose a different member, I think the outcome would be the same, because you saw it in Judiciary Committee a couple of years ago when it passed nearly, I believe it was unanimous or near unanimous out of committee, the ACOA, American Innovation and Choice Online Act, that was Senator Klobuchar, Senator Grassley's antitrust reform bill, near unanimous vote out of the Senate, out of the committee. When they passed the Kids Online Safety Act out of the Senate, near unanimously. And just recently, when they beat down this tremendous overstep on the part of Republicans in the tech industry to eradicate 200 state bills, 99-1. That's what happens when you bring tech measures to the floor. Public opinion is on our side. Lawmakers know it. They don't like being held under people's thumbs. And when they have the opportunity to vote against big tech, they do it. And so you have tech lobbyists here and in Congress talking out both sides of their mouths. They want a federal federal law. Oh no, but we have to leave it up to the states. Oh, we should let the states regulate things like deepfakes. Oh no, but when deepfakes and kids' online safety protections come in the federal, in the Congress, no. That's, China. Or we'll break the internet. So you have to look at these. I look at this as a huge win for advocates like myself. And I do believe that when it will be brought up as a standalone bill, because it's not going anywhere, it'll be defeated just the same.
John, I know you're not a federal lobbyist, but
Thank you.
thoughts?
I think all of you said in one way or another that ultimately having some sort of a federal standard, particularly with the implications for national security and other concerns, makes more sense. How do you get there? It's a really hard thing to do, and at least this Congress in the last 5 years hasn't done hard things. So I certainly was my expectation was if a moratorium passed, it would mean nothing got done for some period of time, which I'm not sure is an outcome that anybody sitting up here would necessarily advocate for. In the past, when hard things have a lot of times get done in Congress, I've been a part of some of them here in California, the states started on financial privacy, the states have started on internet privacy. I think that's sort of the natural way of things because it builds some support and some knowledge. And that's probably what ends up happening here, that there's some collective amount of work that's done at the state level. New York's done a bill, California might do a bill, and you'll start to see some consensus emerge that may not exist at this moment. But I would tend to agree that what happened last month was sort of evidence of a House that didn't have consensus on what the solution was yet. And no one wanted to take a bad vote on something that where they couldn't see where it was headed.
I think it's fair to say that in this Congress anyway, there may not be consensus that today is Tuesday. But that said, now here in California, you briefly mentioned data privacy. It's come up a few times here. And to me, it's an interesting comparison because we have the CCPA here, the California Consumer Protection Act, which of course came about through a ballot measure, right, or was a threatened ballot measure. Yeah. Yeah. The back and forth, the threat of the ballot measure is always there, of course. I'm curious, though, now that we've got it into effect, it's been here a little bit. It's had its cousin get adopted as well. The CPRA. I can't even keep them all straight. Is there something to be learned there from our data privacy law, which was based on the General Data Protection Regulation of the EU, that could be applicable in terms of how we could approach a more wide-ranging regulation of artificial intelligence here in California? Is it a cautionary tale, or is it maybe some breadcrumbs toward a broader solution? I don't know, Shane, what do you think?
That's a big question. I think it might provide some guidance to sort of a broader solution. You had, again, an issue that had a lot of public support, and that public support helped drag along policymakers to do something. You also had someone with a tremendous amount of money who wanted to move the conversation along, which always helps with ballot initiatives. So, maybe that is some guidepost for future legislation on this. I don't know.
My turn? Yes. Pass. I will answer that question. I have a situational answer and a structural answer to that question around the privacy agency and AI. The situational answer is that I thought that the rules that were proposed last year were overbroad and tried to grab territory for the agency that it didn't have the expertise or, frankly, the mandate to take. That's an answer that's responsive to the situation of those particular rules. They have been changed. To be honest with you, I haven't actually looked at the latest, so I'm just being honest. I can't give an updated opinion on that. I should probably do that. Then there's the structural answer. And I think the structural answer is yes, the CCPA has a role to play in addressing data privacy in artificial intelligence. The reason I say that is because I think all 265 agencies and departments across state government have a role to play in addressing harms from artificial intelligence. And everyone, and this is back to the first thing I was saying when we started this panel, every single agency and department, well, maybe not every single one, I can think of a couple that don't have Nexus, but the vast majority of agencies and departments inside this state government and local government and every other state government around the country, I think are well advised to look at what their statutory responsibilities are right now. And if you work at the Med Board at the Department of Consumer Affairs, and if you work at CDCR in the prison system, and so on and so forth down the list, you really already have a tremendous amount of statutory and regulatory authority to do the job that you exist to do. We have an evolving threat environment where this technology is changing every day, and the number of times that our friends at the Cyber Security Information Center that we have in the state, basically our version of like the anti-hacker guys, they try to prevent cyber attacks against critical infrastructure every day. That's their job. They've done that before AI, and they're going to continue to do it after AI and through AI. The question is, what new tools do they need? The question is, what new tools does an inspector at the medical board need to ensure that someone or some technology system is not illegally practicing medicine without a license, which is already illegal? I was saying this in the context of synthetic child sexual abuse material. It's already illegal. The question is not, do we need to make whole new categories of things illegal, which is also a topic we have to discuss. But in the case of CCPA and data privacy, we have maybe the most robust data privacy laws in the country. In fact, I think we do, because I remember the whole fight federally about preempting California. So the question is not, should CCP be involved in governing AI? The answer is yes. The question is to what extent is appropriate, and I think, as I said, the previous version was overreach, but by no means should they stay out of it. Every agency and department should fulfill their responsibility and update their tools and their strategies to address the evolving threat environment.
The question is,
What role, if any, or influence, if any, could CCPA have on wide-ranging AI regulation in California?
I think it's a really unique thing that California has an agency dedicated to privacy. I think that should be celebrated, and there's not a lot of states that can boast of the same. Now, I think that they should do what they ought to do. We recently, when updated rules were put out, they were somewhat watered down. I think that is an unfortunate, giveaway to industry. So I think that there needs to be a check and balance on the very, on the very agencies that are tasked with protecting our privacy. Now, forgive me for being a newbie in the state, but does the agency make recommendations for punitive measures, Jason?
Do they? Yes, I believe they do.
Do they? Because that to me is one thing that I would love. Nicole's nodding. Thank you, Nicole. That one thing that, and I'm not taking a shot at any of the, GDPR or anything, but the enforcement mechanism is always what's tough when you go after companies that have market caps of $1 trillion each. You can't slap them on the wrist with a fine of $2 million, because eventually that just becomes, for them, the cost of doing business. Violating our privacy results in a $2 million fine. Oh well, chump change. So that's the question. I don't know the answer, but there are a lot of smart people up here and in the room. Hopefully we can achieve it.
Well, we'll go to one of them right now. John Ross.
Thanks. So part of your question, I think, also was what lessons in the process to enact CPPA may be helpful here. That was, anchored largely in the GDPR, like what was happening in Europe. I think what's going on with AI regulation in Europe right now will contribute to the debate here, and I think in a similar way sort of help us answer some questions. This strikes me as way harder than privacy, just because of the interests implicated. It's employment, right? There's trade-offs between, truckers and self-driving trucks. There's these sorts of things are going to present themselves across the economy. And more broadly, California, is now, as a tech leader and as a leader in this space, has a lot as a state invested in the success of this industry and of the economy in the state, because it pays for things like schools and everything else that we all care about. So I think that's what everybody's struggling to balance. I think that those trade-offs were easier in privacy. I'm not diminishing the importance of privacy, but I just think the risks and the costs were more confined, and the debate had already come to, should you have an opt-out right or an opt-in right? What sort of choice should you have to control information about you? Well, here we're talking about choices that could affect professions. It could affect cures to disease. It can affect, how we build roads and how we teach in school. I just think there's so many more profound issues at play here that, Jason, I'm going to tap you on the head with my mic this time. I think you're right in saying we have substantive regulators with expertise in bias, in fair lending, in regulating doctors, and building roads and building dams, and all that expertise ought to be what's informing our view of what the risk is in those various lanes. It's just, there's a heck of a lot more lanes here when you talk about AI than we saw with privacy.
John, I'll stay with you on this one.
I'm out of breath.
Just a brief story. It was maybe 10 years ago. I was at a conference in Providence, Rhode Island, and I was sitting 10 feet away from Elon Musk being interviewed by then Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo, and they were talking a lot about artificial intelligence, and Elon was very adamant at that time that there needed to be very strict regulation on artificial intelligence. He's going into great detail about how negative it was going to be on the economy and the particular job markets, transportation in particular, et cetera. And then 10 years later, we got Doge. So I guess the question is kind of an esoteric question, but you guys are very deeply involved with many of the folks who are at the forefront of our technology movement and our AI advances. Now, and I get it also, Elon might be a real outlier for lots of reasons that we could probably all imagine without me saying, but at the end of the day, how do you get more buy-in? Because it seems like we've gone from that to the Gordon Gekko greed is good model. So how do we get more buy-in from because we could sit here and talk about this all day. The Mark Zuckerbergs of this world, the Dreesens, the Peter Thiels, these are the people that could actually solve a lot of these problems on their own, but they're not terribly motivated to do so. But how do we do that? How do we bring the two sides a little closer together for the greater good? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's just your turn to start, but. Is that a nonsensical question?
Shane's turn. No, that's a good question, and I think, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but part of it is I hear companies that I talk to and their executives who are generally enthusiastic, wide open eyes enthusiastic about the potential for AI to make advances in disease research and medical research in a lot of places, and the great things they see coming in a matter of years that they used to project to be decades away. I think until the public starts to see some of the fruits of that and starts to sort of see things happening that they understand and see as benefits, it's going to be harder, to Shane's point earlier, like to sort of bring people along on something that they're not completely understanding. And I think there's a responsibility that you point to among the companies that are trying to, bring change and make and bring progress in certain areas to articulate that and to make that case. And yes, also be cognizant to public concerns about risk and to at least engage in that conversation in a constructive way. That wasn't in our notes either. So
I know, I sprung a new one on them.
I don't necessarily, where to begin? Look, I think there's sort of a natural evolution of tech companies that are founded on a mission, with a mission to do good, to not be evil, to develop AI and then distribute economic benefits. And then you see slowly as they grow and develop other interests, those mottos, those maxims dissolve. And I think we're kind of at that moment. Well, we've been at that moment with Google, with Meta, and we're kind of now at this moment with OpenAI, where the nonprofit to profit conversion, quite controversial. Possibly they're still a nonprofit, or are they a for-profit? Do they still want to distribute the economic benefits of AI? And what are those? Is that going to be universal basic income? You know, because that's allegedly what Elon Musk and Sam Altman fell out about. But I don't know. I'm not on ketamine, so you know. Now
I want to note that I did not say that.
then I'm not on ketamine. I mean, look, I think the way it has to be through regulation from governments, from the federal government. There's self-regulation has been proven to never happen. I do think antitrust reform is also a very good way of ensuring that companies retain, you know, sort of the companies don't get large enough that they outgrow the interests of the countries in which they were founded, or the interests of the national security interests, especially of the countries in which they were founded. So I'll leave it there.
Well, I don't begrudge companies for being companies. I think that companies should go try to make as much money as they can. That's sort of their job. And then I think it's the rest of us who have to try to steer that into directions that are socially beneficial or curb the worst impulses. I mean, we got capitalism for a while, at least until, gets done away with by this current administration. But I think here's what I'll say about that. Yeah, I don't know if kleptocracy. Anyway, the point there is companies exist to maximize shareholder benefit. I don't begrudge them that. They come, they fight for what they care about in the legislature. It's always been the case. That's the way it works. And then the legislature and the governor have to balance interests. In this case, in the case of the development of frontier AI, everything's happening upside down bizarro. Usually big-time technology is developed with government research grants in public labs and then commercialized through universities or through national labs or through defense contracting or whatever it might be. And that's normally the way things have gone, from the internet to jet propulsion to microchips, so on and so forth. This one's upside down, where it's being developed in private by private companies using private venture capital for private gain. There's nothing illegal about that. There's nothing immoral about that. The question then is, what are we as a society going to do to liberate the benefits from the point of maximizing shareholder value? And, every single time you talk, it's always, we're going to discover every disease and cure them all, and we're going to fix climate change. Great. I actually believe that the technology will be able to do that. So when, and can we hurry up and get to that part? And the problem is that there are no business models that create a profit motive for companies to do that when, frankly, the enterprise and the B2B stuff, the API access is what's selling right now, and agentics are going to make a lot of sense for a lot of companies to develop because the productivity gains are going to justify major investment in that kind of technology. I got nothing wrong with browser automation for logistics companies. I think it's great. Good luck. But I would much rather see the part about solving climate change. So let's figure out a way to incentivize business models that develop climate tech solutions. We got cap and trade in this state. We got a bunch of levers we can pull in California that can incentivize investment into the research and development of AI that solves climate change. So we could do that. That's a policy choice we can make. We can do a version of Cal Compute. I got a couple problems with the way Cal Compute is on the margins is drafted, but it's such an important idea. And it's something we have to do, to create a public compute cluster that can supercharge the research that's happening at Caltech and the UCs and CSUs and at Stanford and all these places. We have the preeminent research institutions in the world here. And if we can take the researchers that are doing publicly beneficial research, whether it's research into the safety of the AI systems themselves or potentially commercially viable technology like basically free and ubiquitous medical devices for everyone everywhere, right? That's a doable thing if we decide we want to create a profit motive for that. You can do that through X-Prize-y kind of things. You can do it through direct government grants. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can achieve that, I think the most direct one and probably the least general fund is to create a compute cluster, a publicly available compute cluster that allows researchers who have, this is the way America has worked for a long, long time, is that academics do research and then they commercialize that research. Right now, they don't have access to those premier chips. And if we are able to provide that, we don't have to create a whole bunch of new business models. We can let academics and researchers do what they do. And hopefully, the same people that discovered all of the cures to diseases that we currently enjoy in 2025 will get to work, yes, AlphaFold, I got it. So then the question is, what are we going to do about that with the next step? And I think that the answer to the question, creating these publicly beneficial uses, is a prerequisite of that, is creating some sort of public compute. I just said a lot of words. I'm sorry, that felt like.
Shane, I'll let you finish this one off.
Sure. I think you talking about the two sides meeting, I think that's absolutely the role of government here. I think Jason's absolutely right. The companies have every duty to their shareholders to make as much money as possible. The unions that I represent are basically private sector unions. They get paid by the company making a lot of money, and we don't have anything generally against that. The problem with this technology is that it's growing so fast, and they need to find an outlet to make money from their investment, and the fastest way to do that is to get it to companies to eliminate their highest cost on the balance sheet, which is their labor. And I don't know how to get around that motivation other than the government providing some guardrails that protect, sort of basic jobs for people. Because what are we going to do when they're all eliminated? I just read something that some AI executive was talking about entry-level college, entry-level white-collar jobs. In the next 5 years, 50% of them could be eliminated. What is that like in the job market? I know my kids are college age or just graduated from college. All their friends are finding it very difficult to find jobs. And so in that scenario, what are all those people going to do? And so it's absolutely the role of government to step in and try to keep innovation alive, but also protect the public.
Well, on that, we have time for a couple of questions. So I see a hand over there, Tim.
Good afternoon. First, I want to say this has been a great day. Thank you guys very much for organizing this. My name is Shara Murphy. I work with Senator Cabaldon and wanted to ask you about a bill from last year that didn't make its way to the governor's desk, AB 3211. And thank you, Shane, for your support on that bill last year. Wondering if folks are thinking about AB 853, which is its new incarnation, around watermarking and content provenance that Dr. D'Souza mentioned several times today during the other panel.
Yeah, I'll tackle that. Yeah, we absolutely support that from the perspective of folks who create content, or we're looking at, as John talked about, AB 412. How do you start looking at what's going into the input and affecting what's coming out of the technology, and how do you protect folks who are creating things from their work getting ripped off? So, yeah, we need more bills like that.
Yeah, and I'll just say that's one of the ones I think where folks are really close to an agreement, and my expectation is that one is among those that get worked out. And again, I put it in the category of bills that are focused on a particular problem that people can see and talk about and solve. And so that's my guess on that one, though I'm not certain, but that's where it seems to be trending.
Can I say one thing?
No.
Silenced. More general statement, because I don't know about that bill, so I'll trust these guys. I am totally obsessed as of late with the idea of consumer critical thinking when it comes to AI content. Watermarking and provenance, it's important. It's got all kinds of technological challenges for how you do it and what the user interface looks like and all those sorts of things that I'm not the first person to say all those things. So, got to work all that out. But that's really, I think, a symptom of a much bigger societal question that we have to be asking, which is how do we, kids, college students, entry-level workers, adults, seniors, how does everybody learn to think more critically about what AI is spitting out? You know, if we all now have some level of sophistication around social media content, and it's, even though our brains are maybe not wired this way, when you open up TikTok or when you open up Twitter, you sort of at some level know you're interacting with content that has some bias or has something, and your brain somewhere does some chemistry. I don't think we as a society have developed those instincts yet when it comes to AI, text, video, audio, so forth, and thinking, right? Which is to say, even if I'm told that something was written by AI, what I don't know is how much original thought the prompter put in, how much refining was done. And I think there's a whole body of literature and research and social psychology that needs to happen around critical thinking skills. And if, you know, snap fingers and teach something in schools, I don't necessarily think it should be computer science to everyone. I think it should be like critical thinking, the way that when we were kids, you had to like read the little paragraph and then answer the little bubble questions about critical reading skills. We need that, but for AI. How do you think critically about the bias of outputs and how prompt engineering occurs? And that to me is sort of the deeper question around watermarking and provenance that I'm just totally obsessed with these days.
I think we have time for one more. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here.
Hi, Mary Beth Barber. I work for the state and very specifically look at education issues. So that would be my next question, since we're talking about legislation and regulation of AI. Any comments on about what happens both in K-12 as well as in college?
Anything specific?
Uses by educators, uses by students, what's accepted as homework, what's accepted as uses in the classroom, critical thinking skills. I mean, this is sort of what spurred it, was when you have fifth graders that can turn in an LLM-produced essay as acceptable homework.
Can I just answer and say that's bad? We don't want that?
Then I'm going to the question. I mean, maybe this is the wrong panel, but is there any thought about this particular issue when it comes to our youth?
AI in education, is there, you know, I mean...
I think it's bad, but can I just be a contrarian for a second and we'll just have an argument? I don't know that I necessarily believe it, but I'll just say it. Imagine a future state in which each of us has a chatbot or a thinking partner that starts to really understand our value system, our writing style, our language, our cultural beliefs, and so forth. And the same prompt, if I give to Leah and to Al, will, same prompt, run through their two kind of personally trained models, will give two very different answers. It's an interesting question about what is the output that matters in a time when you had to go to the library and understand the nuances of the Dewey Decimal System, which we don't operate with anymore. In a future state that does not exist right now, training and finessing your own learning assistant, and then being able to take a prompt that is general and come up with a unique response, that in itself requires some critical thinking and some ability with skills to train the technology to work in your benefit. I don't know if I believe what I just said, but there is a world in which the thing that we want to see outputted is different than when we were kids. And I wonder, OpenAI just yesterday, I think, announced a big partnership with Randy Weingarten's union and with AFT. I knew I was going to get it wrong, so I didn't say the acronym. Thank you, I appreciate that. So I'm interested in what the thinking is from the union's perspective on that partnership, because they're thoughtful and they put some time into that, and I'm interested in their answer to that question as much. So, you know, you're a union man, what do you got?
Geez, all I know is all the kids are using it. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question from an educator's perspective. You know, what is the role of AI, and how do you make it beneficial towards the goal of having, you know, educating critical thinkers? I'm not an educator. I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did.
I kind of feel like the answer here is we needed Arnold Schwarzenegger back as governor. If you're too young to know what I'm referencing, that is on you. Anyway, I'm totally obsessed with us ending on time, and we're already late. So I'm just going to say thank you to the great panel. Thank you guys so much. Thank you all of you for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it.